Hello and welcome to Dinis Guarda YouTube podcast series. Once again, we continue portraying and I would say as well, highlighting the personalities that are critical for our times. The personalities that we have been always highlighting, and as well the authors, the thinkers, and the doers. This program and this podcast and this show has been always trying to understand how we can actually go a step further in terms of how we can actually manage the best of our ingenuity, our creativity, and as well our innovation to create success, and as well to keep moving and inspiring people. And in this series, powered by openbusinesscouncil.org and Cities ABC, we've been highlighting personalities based in countries, based in cities, that actually have the spirit of innovation, the spirit of understanding the new directions to go, especially in a time where disruptive technologies and humanity are going through an interesting crossroad that can open fantastic opportunities, but as well very big challenges. So today I'm very honored to welcome to our series a personality that has a huge contribution to the world of creativity, to the world of arts, to the world of media, Sir John Tusa. And we're going to be talking about his career, about a lot of the things he's been achieving, which is a fantastic career that spans multiple decades, but as well that touches some of the biggest institutions, especially in the United Kingdom, and as well with impact worldwide in terms of the work he's been doing, as well in terms of education, in terms of media, and in terms of big cultural and artistic organizations. And as well, we're going to be talking about his book, and the bio I separated in another area. But today we're going to be talking as well about Bright Sparks, which is a book that I recommend people to read and to highlight. So as I mentioned in the previous part, my main focus is the people, the person. And so I want to welcome to our series Sir John Tusa. And I'm privileged to have you here. It's an honor. A lot of the institutions have been working are very important for me. So welcome to our series, first of all.
Thank you very much, Dinis. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
So you have a career that is impressive by all standards, and it actually touches a lot of different areas. It touches, of course, a huge area of, I would say, the epicenter between education, arts and culture, and business and media, which are probably the things that are right now critical for everyone around the world, because all of us interact with this every day in our devices, in our televisions, in our smartphones, and so forth. So tell us a bit about your history, especially from your back days in terms of your education and your academic education as well. I would like to start by the beginnings and what made in your history who you are today. So if you push this to your father, to your family, to some teacher, who opened the doors to the perception of who made who you are?
Yes, that's very interesting and very important, of course. And my father was a businessman. And I think what I learned from him, I only began to learn rather later in life. He was, of course, he ran a factory which made shoes, and there were 3,000 people. And he knew the name of probably a third or a half of the people. He knew them by sight, he knew them by name. And as I went on, I realized how important that is. And that is a very, very precious gift. And he was very, very well organized. If I say he didn't have a very speculative turn of mind, that's just a fact. You know, he was running a large company which worked in the United Kingdom, in West Africa, in the West Indies. And my goodness, you had to be disciplined for that. And that was a very important part of what I think I have come to appreciate more and more as I have grown older. I was going to say developed, but that is, I won't say that I've developed. Then the other big influence was some teachers, and they were mainly teachers of history, which I grew up to love, and I learned a great deal about. I got a history scholarship to Trinity College, Cambridge, with, of course, a very, very high quality of teaching there. And I realized that awareness of history and understanding of history was something which led naturally to journalism. And so for the first 10, 15 years of my working life, it was the history, it was the journalism, it was trying to understand the world, trying to broadcast to people around the world about the world, my world, their world. That was what was important. But always in the background, and I only discovered it later, was the fact that from what I learned from my father was about how do organizations run. And that came comparatively late, but was extremely useful. So I'd say those are the two strands. How do people behave in organizations, and how do you tell the world about what is happening in the world?
So that is in itself an entire podcast and an entire area. Your book is really very powerful on that. So before we go in terms of your career, so within this experience from your father and from your education, so the last decades have been very disrupted. Actually, probably the last 60 years of humanity were more disrupted than all the history of humanity in a lot of ways, because the velocity of change, it keeps going. Actually, at the moment, we are even going faster. So from your education, from your father experience, because in the end of the day, it's about people, but now we have people, media, and increasingly as well, machines we interact with. But like you said, people are still the key element for business, for interactions. So from this, how do you see the relationships? You mentioned the how people work and connect within organizations. The case of your father that knew most of his employees, and he actually was engaging with them. Your own experience in big organizations like BBC, European Union Youth Orchestra, and as well in the Barbican. So how do you see the relationship with people, and what would be the area that you highlight from that experience and background of yours?
The most important lesson was knowing individuals, knowing people, and not being stuck in your office. Believe it or not, the number of executives, you must know this, who never leave their office. In my early days in the BBC, I used to occasionally meet high executives, and they were stuck in their office. I knew one high executive who even had his lunch delivered to him on a tray in his office. Can you imagine? He was running a department, and more than that, and he never came out. So being out naturally, talking to people, seeing people, and I think by doing that, helping people to understand that actually the person who is responsible for taking some of the decisions, when I was taking those decisions, is actually no different from the people who are making the decisions work. In some respects, the people who make the decisions work are more important than the person who said, let's go and do this. I'll give you one little example of how something which is quite small appearing had an effect when I was at the BBC World Service. When I came into the office in the morning, if I'd heard a World Service programme overnight, and I'd liked it usually, I would sit down. I then had a typewriter. This is pre-computer days. And I'd just type a little note, just that size, put it in an envelope and sent it off saying, thank you for the program. I heard it. It was very good. Well done. Thanks. I did that regularly because I wanted to. 40 years later, somebody said to me, do you know, the fact that you wrote those little notes to people first thing in the morning, I always remember, and I can't tell you how much effect that had. They remembered that for 40 years. So imagine the effect that it had. So it's human contact. You know, I think more and more, as I think about organizations and discipline, what matters is how do people behave? Now, behavior is not something that people write about much because it's hard to define. But do you think, if you're running an organization, that you are somehow bigger, better, more important than the people who work in the organization? If you do, you are not behaving very well, and the organization will not run very well. And so it is human behavior. That is the most important thing. And I believe, I can't see that that will become any less important as the world changes. I really, really don't. How you and I behave, how I behave with my colleagues, don't you think that is the most important thing, even more important than rules and regulations, which of course you must keep?
I subscribe 100%. And actually, it's one of the reasons I really admire your book and your career as well, is that this is actually something that universities and organizations are not preparing people, is that the relationships are critical. Everything I achieve in life was through relationships. And like you said, the trait, even digitally, but as well physical, it's more important, but it's the continuous relationships. And this is actually one of the most difficult things to do, because we at the moment, especially young generations, are spending a lot of time in front of devices. They are actually I would say deprioritizing the relationships, and there's a lack of social, cultural, even behavior that I think your generation had still, that we've been losing, especially in the continuous generations that are coming. And we need to highlight that. And that's probably, I think your book is Bright Sparks. I think it's really important, these bright sparks, so we can actually understand and interact. So let's look at your career. And so I mentioned a couple of the achievements, and of course I have the bio. So you have really a fantastic career, and that spans, of course, an award of knighthood in the Queen's birthday in 2003, but that comprehend at least some of the three major global organizations, especially the BBC World Service, the Barbican Arts Centre, that is one of the icons of art and centers of art in the world, actually, and as well the European Union Youth Orchestra. But you have a lot of other things. So if you can highlight a bit of your history and some of the things that you would like to share with our audience.
Yes, absolutely. The first 12, 14, 15 years, I was a journalist, either a radio producer or a journalist. And then the opportunity to become managing director of the BBC World Service came up. I had no experience of management. I had no experience of editing. But various people said, look, you know what the BBC World Service is about because you have always worked there. You should put in for it. Well, I did put in for it. And a lot of people said, well, it's completely irrelevant. He's never run anything, which was true. And the reason that I got the job was because the chairman of the BBC looked at the other candidates who he thought were, as it were, routine BBC bureaucrats. And he said, I'll take the risk. I'll have somebody who knows the World Service and he can learn the rest. So I was very, very lucky with that. But I think the lesson from that is, as far as the appointment is concerned, they said, who understands the organization as an organization, not as a piece of bureaucracy? You know, they said, well, he doesn't know as much about money as he should. And the chairman said, yes, but he'll learn. And for 6 years, it worked very well. But I admired that decision, not just because it benefited me. To understand that if you're running an organization, you need to understand why the organization exists. And the rest you can and should learn. So that was a fantastic, it was a stroke of luck. Of course, they knew I knew about the World Service. It was still a stroke of luck. And then after I'd done that for a while, it was 6 years, and then the Barbican came up. And the reason that I got that job was because I had always been to music, theatre, art galleries, and I knew a lot of people in that world. And people in that world knew that although I was in politics and current affairs, I knew about the arts as well because I loved them. So they said, can he run the Barbican? Well, he can run an organization, and we know that he loves the arts. So sometimes the things that you do just because you want to do them, not because it's going to advance your career, but because you want to do them, with luck, you get credit for them. And so then I was able to put together at the Barbican the experience of running the BBC World Service, a large organization, and years of having been to the arts and suddenly being in a world where I could engage with the arts the whole time. How's that? And that was there for another 12 years.
And it's really an impressive, actually, your work in these two institutions made a big breakthrough in terms of both organizations. So in terms of the BBC and the World Service, it's a very powerful, for people here in Britain, probably they don't understand how powerful it is worldwide. Even me, I'm Portuguese, a bit French, and I grew up as well with the BBC World Service, which I like to hear. And it was one of my first connections with the British culture and a lot of different things. So tell us a bit about that experience and some of the things you did in the 6 years where you were running, and as well on the work you've been doing with the organization.
Well, I think the most important thing, undoubtedly, was that although I'd worked at the World Service and I knew what it was about and I knew many people there, before I took over as managing director, I said I must have 3 months where I can go and I can talk to as many people as possible about what they want to do. It wasn't a question of my going in and saying, I know what the World Service ought to be, because it was what it was. And there was no way that I was going to change that. Though I wanted it to help it to be better. And all the knowledge that I got from talking to people in the World Service was that they all wanted it to be better journalism, better broadcasting, better run, more effective. So really it was terribly simple. That what I was doing was to put into practice the agenda which belonged to the staff. And we had to do a lot of things, but they were things that the people in the BBC World Service wanted to have done. So I wasn't imposing anything. I was enabling an organization to do what it wanted to do in order to be better. I do think that is terribly important. Sometimes you have to come into an organization, for example, at the Barbican, which we can talk about later, and make some changes. At the World Service, it was saying, if this is what you want to do, if this is what you want to be, let us all do it together. And by and large, we did. It was more efficient. Broadcasting was infinitely better. The impact was greater. And it was very, very satisfying. But it sprang from the organization. So you touched that you listened to people for 3 months. I would like to touch this because, like you mentioned before, for me and even me as a CEO, I struggle with that almost all the time, is how do you get the best out of people? And I know that in an organization like BBC is much more complex because you have a lot of people and you have a lot of interests, a lot of complexities and a lot of politics and a lot of as well of even external, internal geopolitics, a lot of things. For instance, BBC is right now going for a lot of challenges. And when you talk about the world has a lot of cultures, a lot of different perceptions. And of course, that is a big challenge to keep all of this. So what would be probably the summarized part that help you glue the strategy and achieve the results to put everyone together in the same journey? The most important thing about the World Service was, from our point of view, that I was born in Czechoslovakia. So I am, as we were always called when we came to this country in 1939, a foreigner. My parents spoke with Czech accents, English accents all their lives. Their friends were Czech and German. So what I always said was, I know what it's like to be a foreigner. I like being a foreigner. and I like foreigners. So when I got to Bush House, there were people speaking 37 different languages and about 60 different nationalities. It was home from home, and everybody knew that. And that made life so simple. And I love the cacophony of all the languages. You know, in the canteen at Bush House, Chinese were in one corner, the Russians were in another corner, always smoking. There were the Arab. I mean, it was wonderful. That made it simple. What is the lesson? You've got to identify with an organization. And if you're not ready to identify, I mean, if you think that you are better than the organization itself, then I think you will make a bad mistake, and I think you will come a cropper.
And this is a big challenge, and I think I share completely the same. I have my corporate experience was working with people from 100 countries, and it's a wonderful experience. But this, I think you and me are probably exceptions, because a huge part of people are afraid of getting out of the comfort zones, and they get close, and that's a big challenge as well nowadays. So coming back to this kind of leadership and the way you because you have and that is one of the beautiful things and very powerful things is you always look at creativity, and that's part of the thesis of your book, to look at how creativity and business can ignite the organizations. So from that experience on BBC and then on the Barbican, how do you apply these things that actually came up to the book that you wrote? But before we go into the book, a bit of how you saw these dynamics going, the multidisciplinarity, the different backgrounds of people, and as well integrating leadership and motivation with the different teams and different areas. And you as well, you were in the European Youth Orchestra as well.
Well, I think that it comes down to a certain modesty of leadership, clarity, but modesty. And it's not to say that people didn't expect me to lead. So I hope I was modest in the way I represented the BBC World Service. But when the World Service ran into a crisis, then they wanted the leader, the managing director, me, to be there representing. So the time comes when you have to stand up and say, I represent the World Service and I'm speaking up for it, and it's only me who will speak up for it. Or you say, I represent the Barbican. This is what the Barbican stands for. I'm speaking up for it. So leadership also has to be made and shown when it is necessary, but leadership has not been, as it were, better or superior to the people who run the organizations. And we were always, the question of creativity and innovation. At the Barbican, one of my leading colleagues was a man called Graham Sheffield, who was the arts director. And he had a very profound original idea. We had all the arts at the Barbican. And he said, you can't just run classical music on one line, theatre on another line, cinema on another line, etc. We have to move them, work with them together, plan them together, program them together. This was very, very advanced stuff. Most people didn't do it. Most people didn't know how to do it. Most people didn't have the ability to do it. And Graham Sheffield said, this is the sort of programming we have to do. And it was very attractive. And we all said, he and I said, it's very risky. He said, yes, and it'll probably lose us money. But we said, yes, it's a risk, but it's something that we have to do. And we will put money in the budget, say, so that if this loses £250,000 in the course of the year, we have set aside £250,000. And I think in that way, we combined risk, innovation, creativity, and financial discipline. And it worked. We did lose the money, but we also made a tremendous impact. And, as long as you take everything into account, then you have a much better chance of making it work.
So that's a very important thing, the way you prioritize leadership. And of course, you've made contributions in the arts of leadership, serving as a chair of the CLOR leadership program, and as well honorary chairman of the artsdesk.com as well in the past. So one of the things you've been doing as well is writing about this and creating a legacy of research around these things. So coming back, for instance, how do you make a decision? This is a particularly interesting question for me as well, personally. So you make money in some things, you lose money in other things. And in the end of the day, it's about how you define the way an organization goes forward. Because, of course, each organization is different. And as well, sometimes you lose money, and in my case, it's been the case, but you get prestige that open other doors to make more business around the world. So this is quite a complex area, because in the end of the day, there's the arts world and the creative arts, and then there's the business and financial world. And normally these worlds clash all the time. And now we have as well the technology world, which is kind of the middle of everything. So from your experience managing important leadership boards and organizations, and you touch about the people and the teams, but from the decision maker and from a leadership perspective and being on the chair and dealing with a lot of board members, how did you got people to be aligned in one direction and to get the results?
Well, I do think that the most important thing was to understand what people wanted now, and to help them realize it. Now, at the Barbican, most of the people, most of the staff, and none of the supervisory board could understand the nature of the ambition for the Barbican that I and Graham Sheffield had. So it was a question of actually getting them to trust, particularly the supervisory board, that although we were going down a new direction, and a very ambitious direction, and a direction which they probably didn't comprehend because it wasn't part of their discipline, but it didn't seem unreasonable, and we quite clearly said, this is how we are going to manage it financially. So I think those two disciplines, and by the by, my arts colleague, Graham Sheffield, was ambitious and creative intellectually, but also a very, very good finance person. So, 20 years ago, people thought that if you had wonderful ideas in the arts, that it was impossible also to have any sort of financial discipline. It's not. I mean, it is possible. It's not only possible, it is necessary. He had it. And going back to my father, I had it as well. Let me tell you a little story about how important finance was in my family. Every Christmas Eve, being Czechs, we had a big Christmas Eve dinner, Christmas Eve. And the most important part of the Christmas Eve dinner was not the presents and thanking the Lord for Christmas. The telephone would ring about 9 o'clock in the evening, and one of the guests, who happened to be the retail sales manager of the shoe company, would go to the phone, and he would be given the financial income results from all the shoe shops for the month up to Christmas. And he'd come in and he'd sit down at the Christmas table and he'd look at my father and say, I think it's all right. These are the numbers. And we have done well. Well, if being thankful for getting the finances right, it's certainly important, but if that actually forms the centerpiece of a great family ritual, it makes an impression on you. So it certainly made an impression on me, and so getting the numbers right has always been instinctive. And that's due to certainly due to my father. But Graham Sheffield was of one. He had the ideas, we took the risk, we balanced the finances. There you are. That's all you have to do.
Oh, that's impressive. And it's a wonderful story, especially on Christmas, that you had to see the results. That shows as well, if the results were not good, you would have not the best Christmas. But that's a massive, a big rigor and discipline as well, because everyone, it's like you said, it's about the discipline but responsibility as well, because if you're not getting the results, you will have a problem as well. So that's amazing. And I love that discipline and rigor, which we need a lot, I think probably more than ever. So I want to shift to your writing and to the different things you did in terms of writing. So you are the author of Engage with the Arts, Writing from the Front Line, that was published in 2007. Where at the time you addressed the challenges of promoting the arts in the face of ongoing funding issues, which is another part of finance. And then you collaborate with your wife and Tusa, and you co-author books such as the Nuremberg Trial, 1983, and the Berlin Blockade, 1988. And as well, you've been works on arts that include Arts Matters on creativity and the Janus aspect, artists in the C20. So do you want to highlight a bit of your trajectory as a writer, and probably on your major book and the ones with your wife, if you want to touch a bit that? I know that it's not a lot of time, but at least you can summarize some of your trajectory on that.
First of all, when I wrote about things to do with broadcasting and the BBC World Service, I wrote about issues which came up the whole time. For example, is the World Service really independent? Why do you broadcast to friendly countries rather than, as it were, countries which are critical? Can you really say that you are broadcasting the truth, the accuracy? These are all the issues which were regular issues, and I thought I need to sort them out in my mind, and writing them and writing these essays was a way of helping me to construct the case that I made managerially on a regular basis. So it was, I had to give these speeches, but it was clarifying my mind. And the same thing when I came to the Barbican. The arts were, almost as much as they are now, under pressure. Financial pressure, political pressure. And I thought, well, I have to explain why I think that the financial pressures are misapplied and why the political pressures are also wrong. For example, under New Labour, they said, we're not interested in excellence in the arts. We want the arts to be useful. And unless you can show the arts to be useful, why should we fund them? So I thought, well, there is an answer to this, one of which is, unless the arts are excellent to start with, they will never be useful, and that you can't make an instrumental connection between I'll do this amount of arts and it'll produce this amount of societal benefit. It's more complex than that. So also in these books, I was working out for mine, and I hope the public satisfaction, the case for why the arts mattered, why they should be properly run, why they should be free of government interference, and also why excellence always mattered in all its diversity. So these books all came out of my needs as a leader. And then once I was retired, and Bright Sparks is one, but the book before that, just called On Board, was about my experiences of governance on some of the major boards in the country. And I thought, nobody writes about governance very much. They write about it in a theoretical way. They don't write about it in an actual way. What happens when there's a crisis on the board? What happens when you sack one chief executive? What happens when you sack two? And all that. And I thought these stories should be told, which is why I did. So everything I've written has been very closely connected with the work that I've done, the jobs that I've done. And I mean, the most satisfying thing, what I learned from working with my wife, she was the author. She was a very good historian. Her books on the Nuremberg trial and the Berlin airlift. What I learned from her was that if you want to write in a compelling way, certainly history, you must tell stories. What do people respond to? They don't respond to theories. They respond to stories. She was a great storyteller. As a teacher, she was a great storyteller. And certainly the last two books, On Board and I think Bright Sparks, is entirely people's stories of how they did something. You said something earlier, Dinis, about thinkers, makers, doers. It's doers that I like, doers that are important. And Bright Sparks is about doers and people who did things which they were told were either impossible, undesirable, or undoable. And those are the people that I love.
Same here, and I love that focus as well. And like you mentioned, writing actually can help you discipline and push you forward your subjects and your creativity. And that brings us, of course, you launched the book. We're speaking in the end of October as we speak and as we record this interview, which is when you launched the book, Bright Sparks, which is your recent book. So I want to touch, there's a lot of things. This book is fantastic. And for people listening to us, we will put all the informations. But Bright Sparks is a book that highlights how we can actually bring to leadership the opportunities through creativity and through innovation. So first of all, tell us about the book and why you wrote this book and why Bright Sparks.
I suddenly realized, not suddenly, but that I had actually known and occasionally worked with some really rather remarkable people. And they were people who might be called loners, might be called individualists, might be called mavericks, but they were people who achieved something particular, a particular project, and they did it because of the personal discipline and the force of their personality. And so I started to think about this, put it together, and thought, my goodness, I now have 6 or 7 cases, really interesting cases, where people did something, created something against the odds. And those are the 7 instances, the 7 stories. Although this is a book about business and leadership, but they're also stories, because all our life is about stories, isn't it, Dinis?
It's all about stories. So I love that you I would like to touch this because you in the beginning you made a dedicatory of the book to the bright sparks who refuse to become dumb squibs. So I would like to elaborate on this because it's beautiful, and I understand what I want to hear from you, and I think our audience is beautiful the way you put it.
Well, I'm well aware that probably all of us think that every morning, most mornings, we come up with the idea which is going to change our lives or change the world. And by lunchtime, we know that it won't. Only people in these books, and that would be a damp squib. You know, in the morning, hey, I'm going to be the leader of something. And by lunchtime, you say, well, no, I'll just go on and sweep the leaves in the garden or something. All these people had an idea and said, yes, it's a good idea, and I am going to work through and make it work. They did not just fade out. They continued to be to set things alight, actually. Joy Breyer and the European Union Youth Orchestra, 50 years later, it is still going, and they probably created the high-level youth orchestra movement. Now, Joy didn't set out to do that. She just set out to run one orchestra, which she did. In the world of television, George Carey, when he created BBC Two Newsnight 43 years ago, he proposed a merger of what was news and what was current affairs and said, if you're telling the audience about the world, you have to bring these things together. Everybody said, do you really? He said, yes. And he did it. And that formula has lasted for 40 years. Because he had the idea and he persevered with it. So that is a flame of journalistic creativity, which has lasted 40 years, which, as you know, in the media is a very, very long time. So it is lots of people like that. They wouldn't take no for an answer. That's one of the other important things.
And this is actually the most important, is the persistence, the resilience. And that's what is beautiful about your book, is the stories, because you have, of course, I'm not going to read the book, but some ideas is, it starts each of the chapters or 8 chapters that you have as a specific story behind it. And that's beautiful because it contexts with and gets into the story. So I would like to touch first of all, one of the things that you mentioned, and you mentioned about that in the morning we all get excited, in the afternoon we give up. So the book is about, the subtitle, and I like that, but I'll repeat it, is How Creativity and Innovation Can Ignite Business Success. So you are working, especially in the Barbican and in the European Youth Orchestra. Of course, they were creative organizations that are, of course, dealing with the most high levels of art creation and art production. But in BBC, it was more culture on different parts. But from your part and in the book, how do you define this part of ignite business success? Because like you mentioned, there's the discipline of business, of finance, there's the discipline of the strategy. And this strategy is how you deal with the different circumstances, because like you have in the book, and for people listening to us, I will just go through some of the titles of the chapters, because I recommend people to read it. You have the Passion Organization, the Turquoise Mountain Foundation, you have the Show Woman and Their 3,000 Children, the European Union Youth Orchestra, the Empresarios, the Heron Tortoise, and I really love the way you put the stories. And one of them that is quite astonishing is a distant attempt, sharing knowledge with Russians after the great collapse of 1991. So there's a lot of different stories, and I'm not going to more. I think people should get the book. But tell us from these stories, what would be like the common trait that you would like to share, and why you wrote the book, of course, on these stories.
The common traits are, to start with, of course, there has to be a vision. Again, lots of people have visions and lots of people dream dreams. One person in this book, incidentally, who is a Polish Shakespeare scholar called Jerzy Limon, who in 1980 said we must build a Shakespeare theatre in Gdansk on the Baltic Sea in Poland. And he always said that he had this dream. Usually, I find that people who talk too much about dreams never get down to it. So to say, it never becomes practical. There was something about Limon that he believed in the dream. He believed in fortune. And for him, that was the way of keeping the vision alight. It took him 25 years from the time he had the dream of the theatre to the time that it was opened. And clearly for him, the fact that it was a vivid dream, he said, look, Shakespeare is all about dreams, all about dreams. We are such stuff as dreams are made of, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. That was his language which kept him going. Now, were there other dreams as well? Now, I think most of the other people I write about had to be far more practical. Practicality, if vision is stage 1, practicality is stage 2. For example, when Rory Stewart was starting to clear a huge pile of rubble, mud, and plastic bags in the centre of Kabul in order to rebuild a historic district, what was stage 2? Stage 2 was hiring 100 labourers with wheelbarrows and spades to clear the mess. So vision number 1, practicality number 2, and then persistence. But those 3 steps have to go. Well, certainly one has to go one after the other. But if you don't have practicality, and it shows itself in different ways, then the vision will never be realized.
Magic words and wisdom, very important words for everyone, wise words. So on the last chapter, lessons and warnings, I'll just touch a couple of things you touched right now, but I'd like for you to elaborate on this because I think it's very important. And I'll quote page 252. The originator achiever will possess the temperament that overcomes setbacks, often huge ones. They will do so by facing facts, often uncomfortable ones, but refuse to be broken by them. To do so involves possessing and displaying certain characteristics, persistent, of course, but combined with adaptability, flexibility, and perseverance. So I would like to touch this because most of the business and the statistics tell that 90% of business fail. And like you said, sometimes you might lose money in the short term, make money in the long, like we mentioned about the case study of Barbican. But on this case particular, what I love is the way you put it, is the facing facts, often uncomfortable ones. And of course, you were in a lot of boards, big ones. I'm sure there were a lot of fights, different opinions. And like you said, compliance in the board is extremely difficult because people have different opinions. And the bigger is the organization, the biggest the challenges. So if you could elaborate a bit on this topic, and of course, this is the lessons and warnings, this part of the chapter, what would be the lessons and warnings that you highlight for young leaders, young entrepreneurs, or people just listening us, because this can be applied to family, can be applied for a lot of things in life.
Well, I think of those points, facing facts and the really difficult ones, early on in his project in Afghanistan, Rory Stewart knew that he was going to run out of money. And he said to his father, the money's going to run out, we're going to have to close it down. And his father said to him, look, what you've done so far is remarkable. There's nothing to be ashamed of. And if it closes, it closes. But accept the fact that it is in a very difficult position. You've done everything you can. You are doing everything you can. And now see what happens. This is enough to make Rory say, right, I won't give up. He flew to meet various people who he thought might help. And he said, this is what we've done. We've run out of money. I'm not taking any money. This is what we're doing. Can you help? And 2 or 3 of them said, yes, of course. But if he hadn't faced that fact, he wouldn't have got that response. And there was another case with the European Union Youth Orchestra. We found, that is on the board, that the European Union was changing the basis on which institutions like the EUIO was being funded. And we said, well, if you change the rules to this, we will have to close. It's perfectly simple. We will not trade insolvently. And this regime will not allow us to continue. So then we looked at one another and said on the board, we said, well, I think we've got to go public on this. I said, really? We'll make a bit of a noise. We did. They said, yeah. We said, yes. So we made it public and said the EUIO may have to close because of the way the EU is changing its funding. And within days, the musical world responded, starting with the members of the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, many of whom had their experience in the EUIO. And they signed a message to the German Federal Culture Minister saying, you cannot let the EU do this. And suddenly there were messages from all over the world saying this mustn't happen. And the EU then changed the funding back to where it was. So that is 2 things. One, we faced the fact, we recognized the fact, we faced that we would have to close, and we were then honest and we went public. And because of all the other things we'd done, the response was then fantastic. But so never duck the facts. And even when it's inconvenient, I sometimes say one of the most important things people have to have is a sense of danger. That is when the risk coming towards you, and it's usually inconvenient and you don't want to know about it. The risk coming towards you is so great that you must at least say, what is going on. And we didn't run away from the EU funding crisis. We faced it, and because of that, it was solved. So that, I think, is flexibility and perseverance. So there's never a straight line with the vision. The vision's there, but you have to do that the whole time, and that doesn't matter so long as the vision is still intact.
This is very powerful. It's very inspiring, and I'm very grateful just to share this with you. So I want to touch, and I know that I'm finishing the time. I want to be respectful of your time. If you have time for one or two more questions, I would appreciate. So one of the parts of the book is the creativity and innovation. So you touched the importance of facing the facts, perseverance, and being very, very open to manage risk, and as well to understand the risks, because if you don't look at the risks and if you don't face the facts, definitely you'll not change the problems. So one of the questions I have is, in the book you touched this, but I would like for you to share with the audience is, so if you are running an organization, you need to keep changing, you need to keep innovating, and you need to be creative, because of course a business model changes. There's trends, there's, like you said, funding mechanisms that change from one day to the other, and you have to be prepared for all the risks that come out of that. So from your experience on boards and with leaderships and teams, where do you put the creativity and innovation on this part?
I think you have to be open to it. I think as far as the board is concerned, I think a board has to be aware if they are not receiving from the executives sufficient ideas for progress development. So that a supervisory board can encourage the executives to be more imaginative, to take more risks. On the other hand, if you have an executive team that isn't capable of formulating these ideas, well, then there's also a lesson to be learned from that. But the idea of innovation always has to be on the agenda on the part of the board. As far as the executives are concerned, at the Barbican, we were always, every 2 to 3 years, saying, what does the artistic policy look like? It mustn't be the same as what it was 2 to 3 years ago. How is it going to be different? How is it going to be expressed? And in the case, if you think of a long-term impact of change and innovation, on the BBC, when Newsnight was founded 43 years ago, that was an absolute innovation in the way that reporting of the world on television was done by the BBC. That has lasted for 43 years. Now that's an idea which was implemented and had a profound impact, not just on the way BBC did news and current affairs, but on the way that, for example, the Channel 4 did. This is an idea which spreads through into the practice of journalism on television as a whole. That is a terrific impact, I think.
Yeah, this is very, very powerful and very, very important, because if you don't really look at these things, you actually get in the rabbit hole and you really get lost. So I know that I'm passing the time, so I want to be respectful for you and for your time. So from the book, and for people listening to us, from your experience in leadership and from the different people that you've been working for, and I always try to keep the lessons, and the book has so much lessons and stories, because the stories are really important. What would be the advice you give for young leaders or leaders listening to us at this time, and where the book can help them understand how to improve their leadership and improve the success and their journey, their story?
Don't be afraid. Don't be frightened of good ideas. Be very honest about what is a good idea and what is not so good an idea. Always remember that how an organization, how you act is important, but you can't just go on doing the same thing. always try to respond to people who may be inconvenient but have a good idea. You don't know all the answers. But I think what I would say to anyone is, when it comes to making decisions, and these may be personal decisions as well as institutional decisions, there are three questions you ask yourself. First of all, what does the head think? Secondly, what does the heart feel? And thirdly, what does your stomach know? And in my experience, my stomach, my body, always tells me the truth. You can be fooled by your head. You can be beguiled by your heart. But your body will always tell you what is the right decision. And I'm afraid I have found this to be completely accurate through several crises.
Wow, that's very powerful. I love this. So I have to ask one last question. So how do you listen to your body? Because I think that's an art that very few people can manage their body, because their body creates pains, like you said, in the stomach and different parts. But how do you lead that when you, because everyone tries to use the mind, like you said, the heart, of course, is obvious because of the passions and different parts, but the body, not so much. You would say that is instinct, a mix of instinct and learning, or is something that you need to listen interior for your drive and for your conscious as a being? And especially this is more important as we come to a time of AI. So I would like to hear that.
Dinis, it is much more fundamental than that. When my body tells me that something is wrong, on 3 occasions, 3 different circumstances, I woke up in the middle of the night and my body was drenched with sweat, because it was saying the decision you are about to make or have made is wrong. It's not such a small indicator. The body was drenched with sweat. The body was in revolt.
Wow. I think this deserves a very important thinking, and I'm very grateful for sharing this moment with you. So I think for people listening to us, please get the book. And there's a lot of wisdom, a lot of stories. And of course, Sir John Tusa is very present in the internet. There's a lot of information about him, about his achievements. Please listen and learn. And there's a lot of pieces of wisdom in this interview that I will share, of course, with all of you. Please think about this. Listen to your body. Listen to the bright sparks that are coming out of you. Thank you so much. Very grateful to have you here and appreciate the time you dedicate for our channel.
Dinis, thank you very much indeed. I very, very much enjoyed your exploration and really making me think. I'm most grateful. I very much enjoyed it.
It's my honor. Thank you so much.